She has never needed loud statements to be understood. Meryl Streep's presence has always been built from restraint, precision, and an instinct for where silence speaks more clearly than explanation. Over the course of 5 decades, she has shaped her career with careful intention, allowing the work to remain the center of attention while her private world stays guarded. Interviews come and go, awards rise and fade, but her approach remains the same. Speak only when there is something worth adding. This consistency is why the absence of certain topics becomes noticeable. Not dramatic, not pointed, simply absent. One of those silences surrounds Dustin Hoffman. Meryl Streep was not born into stardom. She was trained for it. Her background was theater, technique, rehearsal, and text-based performance. She studied voice, movement, language, and emotional presence long before Hollywood ever placed a camera in front of her. Her focus was never fame. It was character truth. Her early work on stage shaped the quality audiences now associate with her, the ability to inhabit another person without theatrical flourish. She did not announce emotion. She allowed it to appear, slowly, in the subtle shifts of expression, tone, and breath. That discipline is a foundation that carried her into film. Dustin Hoffman came from a different tradition. He came through the era of method intensity, improvisation, and emotional pressure as a path to authenticity. Where Streep sought layered internal construction, Hoffman leaned into confrontation with the moment itself. He believed in provoking, destabilizing, and disrupting to reach something raw. Both approaches have legitimacy. Both approaches have shaped some of the most significant performances in American cinema. But they do not always align comfortably. Their differences met on a film that would define early modern acting, Kramer vs. Kramer in 1979. The film required emotional realism. It required vulnerability, conflict, and the exhaustion that comes from two people unraveling the life they built together. Hoffman and Streep delivered precisely that. The performances were celebrated worldwide. The film won Best Picture. Hoffman won Best Actor. Streep won Best Supporting Actress. Critics, audiences, and the industry all recognized the result as something more than performance. It was a cultural moment that shifted how family conflict was portrayed on screen. It changed the direction of both of their careers. But recognition is not the same as alignment. When Meryl Streep speaks about Kramer versus Kramer, she speaks about the script, the characters, the cultural relevance, and the emotional weight of the story. She does not revisit the details of the collaboration. She does not discuss Hoffman directly. The conversation stays on the work, not on the working relationship. It is a separation she has maintained consistently for decades, not with bitterness, not with avoidance, but with a professional boundary that is firm and clear. That boundary comes from how Streep views her craft. She does not narrate her process as personal history. She does not reframe her performances through relationships with co-stars. She rarely assigns credit or critique to individuals. Her language stays focused on the text, what the role needed, what the story meant, what the audience was supposed to feel. She rarely revisits private dynamics because she does not place the value of performance in behind-the-scenes anecdotes. The performance is the record. The film is the explanation. The rest lives in memory, not in public. Over time, this approach became even more defined. Streep moved into different eras of her career, expanding her range and taking on roles that explored leadership, grief, resilience, authority, humor, and complexity. She did not remain in one genre or one character style. Her collaborations changed. Her interests shifted. The subject she discussed publicly evolved with her. Hoffman remained a figure from a particular moment, a turning point, a chapter that contributed to her development without defining her identity. The silence that surrounds his name is not sharp. It is simply selective. Meryl Streep understands the weight of her words. When she speaks on a topic, the industry listens. When she acknowledges a colleague, the framing can shape careers, reputations, and legacies. She does not use that influence loosely. She chooses language with care. She chooses subject with care. And sometimes she chooses not to speak at all, not out of avoidance, but out of respect for the distance time creates. The result is a silence that is measured, consistent, and intentional. Not cold, not dismissive, just private. The story of Kramer versus Kramer has already been told, on screen, in the work itself. Streep has no interest in competing narratives, no desire to re-explain what is already part of cinematic history. Her silence is the acknowledgement that some chapters close simply because the story has been completed. This is not a silence that hides something. It is a silence that protects something, the integrity of the work, the focus of her career, and the way she chooses to move through the world. As the years passed, Meryl Streep's public presence shifted in a noticeable way. She moved away from the kinds of interviews that centered on personal dynamics and began to speak almost exclusively about the work itself, the writing, the structure of a role, the emotional truth required to portray a character, the responsibility of performance. She became not only an actor others admired, but a reference point for how to talk about acting professionally. Her interviews turned into lessons in observation, language, and restraint. She did not describe colleagues. She described process. This transition happened gradually, but consistently. When discussions about past work surfaced, she redirected the focus to preparation and intent. When asked about industry figures, she highlighted what the project demanded, rather than the personalities involved. When pressed to revisit old working relationships, she chose to talk about the character instead of the circumstance. It was not deflection. It was discipline. She understood that memory and interpretation shift over time, but the film remains unchanged. By keeping the conversation rooted in the wake, she preserved the clarity of that record. Meanwhile, the public conversation surrounding Kramer versus Kramer evolved in a different direction. For audiences and media, the film became a cultural landmark in representations of divorce, custody, and emotional fragility. People wanted to understand the dynamic between the actors because they believed the emotional realism on screen must have reflected something behind the camera. Streep did not encourage these interpretations. She did not correct them either. She simply stayed outside of that conversation. Her silence allowed the film to remain the primary source of understanding, not speculation about how it was made. Her approach to public memory is consistent with how she approaches character work. Streep built performances through internal construction, research, emotional mapping, voice control, and an understanding of how a character experiences the world. She has often said that the performance belongs to the character, not the actor. The actor is a temporary carrier of the story. When the project ends, the character belongs to the audience. The actor steps away. This is the same way she treats past collaborations. They belong to the film. They do not require ongoing commentary. As her career expanded, new roles reshaped her artistic identity. Films like Sophie's Choice, The Bridges of Madison County, The Devil Wears Prada, Doubt, and The Iron Lady positioned her as an actor who could inhabit emotional, intellectual, comedic, authoritarian, and deeply intimate characters with equal clarity. Each era of her work brought new collaborators, new directors, and new thematic concerns. The distance from earlier collaborations was not rejection. It was progression. Public attention, however, often prefers to return to origin stories, to the moment where everything changed. For Streep, that moment was Kramer versus Kramer. It introduced her to a global audience and demonstrated her ability to deliver a performance of psychological depth. But Streep does not treat early success as a defining moment. She treats it as one step in a long sequence. Returning repeatedly to the same story would anchor her to a single version of herself. Her silence protects her ability to continue evolving without being pulled backward. Another factor in Streep's selective public memory is her respect for ensemble contribution. She has said repeatedly that filmmaking is collective. No performance belongs to one person alone. Discussing past collaborations in detail risks highlighting individuals rather than the group that built the narrative. By not centering one co-star, she preserves the idea that the film stands because of everyone who contributed, not because of one relationship. There is also the matter of time. Decades have passed since Kramer versus Kramer. Careers change. People change. The context surrounding events shifts. Speaking about something from early adulthood with the language and awareness of later life risks reinterpreting meaning in a way that may not match the moment as it was lived. Streep prefers not to rewrite the past with the clarity hindsight provides. She allows the past to remain the past. The performance is preserved. The experience is personal. In this sense, the silence is not about Dustin Hoffman at all. It is about Meryl Streep's understanding of what it means to sustain a long career. To keep moving forward as an artist, one must sometimes leave earlier chapters closed. Revisiting them can freeze identity in place. Letting them remain untouched allows the work to continue expanding. Her silence is not a commentary on him. It is a commentary on how she chooses to stand in her own history. She does not speak about certain collaborations, not because they lack importance, but because their importance has already been fully expressed on screen. The film is a record. The performance is the explanation. The work says enough. The silence that surrounds Dustin Hoffman in Meryl Streep's public conversation is not an unresolved conflict. It is a choice that aligns with how she has built her life and career. Streep has always understood that longevity requires selectivity, not only in roles, but in what one allows to follow them. When she moves from one project to another, she does not bring the previous one with her. She allows each performance to exist in its own time. This approach prevents her identity from becoming tied to any one collaborator, one director, one moment, or one defining narrative. It is not a denial of the past. It is a way of keeping the future open. Over the years, Streep's interviews have increasingly focused on broader themes: representation, storytelling responsibility, the evolution of the industry, and the way characters help audiences see themselves. Her attention is directed toward the work she is doing now and the next role after that. She speaks about language, accents, emotional preparation, costuming as psychological structure, and how the body adapts to character needs. These are the topics she returns to again and again. They form the core of her public identity. In contrast, revisiting Kramer versus Kramer repeatedly would mean returning to one of the earliest phases of her career, one where she was still defining herself, still learning how to navigate film sets, relationships, and public attention. Streep does not present her life as a story of formative eras. She presents it as a continuous process of refinement. To her, one performance did not create the actor she became. The actor she became shaped every performance afterward. The silence is also shaped by her sense of proportion. Streep has made dozens of films, worked with countless directors, and built a body of work that spans genres, themes, and emotional registers. Kramer versus Kramer was one step, one role, one collaboration. It was significant, but not singular. Speaking about Hoffman would mean placing him at the center of her narrative, and that is not how she structures her legacy. She centers the story, not the figures around it. This selectivity can be seen in how Streep discusses many periods of her life. She rarely retells personal stories from sets, not because they were unpleasant, but because they belong to the environment of the work, not the memory of it. She preserves the separation between the life lived and the life performed. It is this separation that allows her performances to maintain their clarity. The characters are allowed to exist without becoming attached to her personal experiences. The audience sees a character, not the actor's recollection of how the scene was made. As time moved forward, Streep's influence shifted from being a performer within the system to being a reference point for how the system can evolve. She became someone others looked to for guidance: younger actors, directors, playwrights, and storytellers who are building new ways to communicate narrative feeling and emotional authenticity. Her position changed from participant to model. In that transition, her past collaborations became less relevant than the principles she teaches through example. Her silence also respects the privacy of the past. When two people work together on a film that demands emotional exposure, that experience remains personal to them. Speaking about it decades later would change its meaning, not because the facts would be different, but because the emotional context surrounding them would have changed. Streep understands that memory is not neutral. Time shapes interpretation. Silence preserves the honesty of the original experience. The legacy of Kramer versus Kramer endures without commentary. The film remains available. The performances remain visible. The story continues to resonate. To add new language to that meaning now would shift it, reshape it, or risk overshadowing it. Streep protects the film by not reframing it. Her silence keeps its legacy intact. This is why the question, why doesn't she talk about Dustin Hoffman anymore, has a simple answer. Because the work is already spoken. Because the film is complete. Because some chapters are finished the moment the camera stops. Streep's silence is not distance. It is conclusion. Her legacy, then, is not built from public reflection, but from performance itself. She does not explain her past. She continues creating. She does not revisit what has already been said. She allows each new character to become its own moment of meaning. In doing so, she has built a career defined not by commentary, but by contribution. She does not talk about Dustin Hoffman anymore because she does not need to. The story that mattered exists on the screen. Everything else belongs to the past, exactly where she chooses to keep it.